The tour begins Hilchas Chanukah in Orach Chaim Simon Tov Reish Ayin, and he writes that Tiknu Chachamim, the Chacham were mitaken Chanukah Shmonos Yomim Shel Yontif. So we're going to try to see if there's any significance in calling and categorizing Chanukah as a Yontif. The Ramah at the beginning of Tov Reish Ayin brings down the Mordechai that Kavu Osam Yomim Lemishte Ulesimcha. So it's not only Halil Vodah, but according to the Mordechai, one of the Talmidim of the Marami Rutenberg in Chachmei Ashkenaz, he writes that these were days not only of Halil Vodah, but also of Mishte V'Simcha. Now, we used to calling Mishte V'Simcha days of Purim, not Chanukah. So that's a big chiddush of the Ramah. And the Ramah goes on to say, based on this Mordechai, Ribui Su'uda Sha'osim B'Chanukah B'chlal Sudas Mitzvah. If you enhance your Suda, special Suda, in honor of Chanukah, then it becomes a Sudas Mitzvah. So you get the impression, according to the Ramah, that although not like Purim where there's an explicit obligation and a requirement to set up a Suda, in Chanukah, it's more of what we would call a Kiyum HaMitzvah without a Chiyuv. But in any event, there is an entity of Mishta V'Simcha, of Suda, on Chanukah, according to the Mordechai, and as codified by the Ramah. The Tur, getting back to the Tur for a moment, writes in the name of Rishonim that the reason for the name Chanukah is Nutrikun for Chanu Chafeh. So as opposed to the classic understanding of most Rishonim, that the name Chanukah is Al Chanukas HaMizbeach, which is what the Chashmonaim did after defeating the Greeks, we have now an alternative understanding of the name Chanukah, in which we split the word Chanukah into two. Chanu, which means they camped or they rested on Chafei on the 25th of Kislev. Says the Ramah that says the Bach, that Mikan Yesh Smach Leminhag Shalolasos Melacha. He says that the word Chaniyah here, Chaniyah, means Isur Melacha, so it means resting, and the concept of resting in halacha reflects on desisting from Melacha, and this is a smach, some sort of an asmachta, if you will, for those who follow the custom to abstain from Melacha Bishosh Aniros Dolkim. Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. In any event, this minhag of Isur Melacha, being noag Isur Melacha on Chanukah, is reflected in the very name of the holiday, according to this Mahalach. That it is a day of Chanoyah meaning Isur Melacha, and this minhag, therefore, is upgraded to a very special status. It's not just a regular custom that you and I can decide, all right, it's Chanukah, we're not going to do Melacha on Chanukah. Who are you and I to create such a minhag? But if the minhag is reflected, as the Bach claims, in the very name of the holiday, Chanu Chafei, that gives the minhag an upgraded status and worthy of our study. Now, on the side, let me make a comment here that my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik used to always teach us the statement in Chazal, which he repeated to us many, many times, Minhag Yisrael Torahi. So I'd like to understand the deeper meaning, perhaps, of this minhag to abstain from Melacha on Chanukah. And the Bach goes on to say that mitam zeh, because of the fact that the Torah calls the days of Chanukah Yontiv, therefore, number one, nagu laharbos b'seuda kimo Yontiv. That's number one. Number two, nagu levatel mimalacha kimo b'yontiv. So we have two dimensions of calling or categorizing Chanukah's Yontif. One is Seuda, which we called in the Mordechai's language Mishteh v'Simcha, and number two, reflecting Isur Malach. Then the Bach goes on to say that Bifrat HaNoshim, the women folk, specifically took on this minhag of Isur Malacha, and Mishum Shanes Nas Al Yidei Isha. Now, I believe that the reference of the Bach is to the Gemara in a number of places that says women are obligated in their Chanukah, despite the fact that it's man grama, because Af Hein Hoyu Bosa Nes. The Gemara quotes this in many places, amongst them in Arvei Psachim, and there in Arvei Psachim, the Rashbam, who took over for Rashi, so to speak, in Arvei Psachim, says that Af Hein Hoyu Bosa Nes means that the Nes came about through the women. And the Rashbam goes on to say that in the case of Daled Kosos, which is Zecher Le Yitzias Mitzrayim, it's Bizchus Noshim Tzidkonios Nigalu Avoseinim Mitzrayim. And the Rashbam makes a reference to Purim, Af Hein Hoyu Bosa Nes, because the Nes came about through Esther. And with regard to Chanukah, Tosfos actually fills in the missing blank of the Rashbam to be consistent with the Rashbam's thesis, and he mentions Yehudit, right? Judy, or Judith, I guess you'd say in English, was responsible for the Nes of Chanukah. Now, what exactly did Yehudis do? This was even before the Chashmonaim got involved in the Milchama. She fed one of the leaders of the enemy army, of the Yevanim, Chalav, and she then cut his head off, and she chomps around with his head, and then the Jewish people realized that, they were inspired to go to battle. And in the latest sequence of events, the Chashmonaim got involved. Now, if we do a little bit of research into this minhag of Isur Malacha to try to get a grasp on it on a deeper level, why Isur Malacha on Chanukah? When is the Isur Malacha noeg? I believe that we'll come up with 3 different shitos, no less than 3 shitos. Shita number 1, which was intimated by the Ramah, is really the Shita of the Rosh. The Rosh is quoted by the Orchos Chaim, again in Siman Tafresh Ayin, B'tama Minhag, Kedei sheyeh heker sha'asu l'shtamesh la'or haner. We know that our final conclusion, La'alocha, is that Aneros Halolu Kodeshem. As we sing in Aneros Halolu, Ein Lonu Rishus L'Shtamish Bahem. We don't want to use the Ner for our own purposes. And we look at the Ner, only to be reminded of the Nes of Chanukah. Now, if you keep in mind that back in the day, they didn't have electricity the way we have it, and they used candles to light up the room, you could imagine that if during the time period of Ner Dolok, of the lit candle of Chanukah, people would use the Ner for Melacha, let's say, for example, you're sewing or weaving, and you need to see very clearly exactly, where to put the needle in and how to thread the needle, etc., you might be very much tempted to come so close to the Ner that you benefit from the Ner. And in doing so, you have violated the law of Ein Lanu Rishus L'Shtamish B'hem. So therefore, the Minhag said, you know what? We're going to go a step further, and we'll desist from any Melacha. And in doing so, we guarantee that there's a heker, that this Ner is not for the purpose of lighting up the room so we could do our activities, our Melacha, but rather for the purpose specifically earmarked as a Ner Mitzvah, Ner Chanukah, Zeicher L'Nes. The Mishnah Brura in Taf Reish Ayin, as I always say, let's see what we do in Mr. Brura's class, right? The Mishnah Brura writes that the only minhag, according to the Rush, to desist from Melacha is for the half hour that we need the Ner Mitzvah. Because after the half hour, you're allowed to benefit from the Ner. You can extinguish the Ner if you like. I know in our family we try to keep it going a little bit longer, to expand the Persubedisa, but technically, after a half hour, which is called in the Gemara's language, Mishatishka Chamache, Tichle Regel Menashuk, for that half hour, you need a Ner Chanukah, a Ner Mitzvah, and also L'Shtamish Bi'ora. So the heker, that you want to make sure that it's crystal clear that that Ner is functioning as a Ner Chanukah should be for a half hour. After that, then sei gesund and stark, and go ahead and do your malach. So that's clearly one approach to justify this minhag of Isur Malacha for that half hour while the Ner is dolek, so that you should have a heker not to be mishtamish li'or, designated and earmarked exclusively for the mitzvah of Chanukah. Now, let me just point out that if we accept the derech of the Rush, for sure, it goes without saying that men, like women, should accept this minhag. Meaning, the women may have initiated the minhag, but what difference does it make whether it's a man or a woman if you want to set up a heker on the Ner and guarantee that we're not going to be mishtamish ba'ora? Maybe you could say that women are more likely to weave and sew than men. I don't know. But it should really be extended to men as well. But now we have a second approach. A whole different approach to explain the nature of the minhag of Isa Malach on Chanukah and when it should apply. And that's the Shibbolei Alekik, one of the late Rishonim. And he writes, Yesh Makomo Shenagu Shelo Lasas Malacha Kol Hayom, the entire day. We're going minakotza lakotza, from a half hour to 24 hours, or if you want to say 8 over 24. No malach. But I found in the Magen Avram something very fascinating that really caught my attention. Again, we're in Taf Reish Ayin. The Magen Avram writes in Sivkot Dalet, and I think it's a pshara, a sort of compromise sheet between the two extremes, going from a half hour to 24/7, that Yesh minhag les or kolzman shaneros bebeis hakneses dolkim, to abstain from malacha as long as the candles in the synagogue are lit. V'hainu ad kechatzos laila. Interesting. Now I racked my brains and I tried to figure out why chatzos. And immediately I thought of the Mishnah at the beginning of Shas, that the Rabbanan required that we recite Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis ad chatzos. So you want to make a minyan for Ma'ariv in the Beis HaKnesses, make sure that the minyan will be, for Ma'ariv, will be completed by chatzos halayla. Comes chatzos, we close the doors of the shul. We don't want any more minyanim after chatzos because we want to make sure that Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis should be recited before chatzos. That's what I came up with. There may be another explanation that I'm not aware of. He doesn't, the Magen Avraham doesn't give us more of an insight as to why the neros in the synagogue are lit up until chatzos. But be that as it may,
Tikkun chatzos.
Yeah, please.
Tikkun chatzos. You know, some people may come to do tikkun.
Is tikkun chatzos done in the shul? That Clanton Park. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, in Clanton Park they say tikkun chatzos in the shul. I forgot about that.
If anybody was ever there at chatzos, they would know that there were people there saying tikkun chatzos.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly, but the bottom line is, according to Magen Avraham, the candles that were lit for Chanukah in the Beis HaKnesses were lit up until, but not beyond chatzos. And therefore, the minhag of desisting from Melacha, paralleling the Ner Shebe Beis HaKnesses, would require that we desist from Melacha up until chatzos.
It's just interesting because the halacha is you can light the candle, you can light the neros until actually sunrise. So really, the nighttime isn't the time to. I mean, maybe when it's saying when the neros in the shul is, maybe it's talking about you there's an Indian right to light them in the morning whenever you're davening. So it's emphasizing those times, meaning not necessarily the whole 24 hours.
We're not saying that because you'll have a Ner Chanukah, therefore you're also b'Melacha. If we were saying that, then you're right. Maybe the entire night, which is the Zman of the mitzvah of Chanukah, would be also b'Melacha according to this minhag. What we're saying is that in some sense, we're connected to the Beis HaKnesses, and the light of the candles of Chanukah were lit in the Beis HaKnesses up until, but not beyond chatzos. Hence, the Isa Melacha is up until chatzos. So we're not talking about the Ner itself. If we talk about the Ner itself, the Mishnah Berurah points out that would be a Chatzi Shah.
No, but I'm saying maybe because of the Persume Nisa, so it's including the day, the time when the lights are on in the shul as well, which means in the morning.
But again,
okay,
the real question that we have over here, Rabbosai, is the following. We understand that if it's a din in the Ner of guaranteeing that we don't get any benefit from the Ner, then that applies for a Chatzi Shah, for a half hour. I can also explain logically the Shibbolei HaLeket's position that the Iser through the minhag of Melacha applies 24 hours, because then we're going back to our original point that we made in the name of the tour, that Chachamim were kovim these days as days of Yontif. And if it's a day of Yontif, it's also Melacha, 24/7. But I'm perplexed by the Magen Avraham's minhag that he codifies here, connecting our Ner in the Bayis with the Ner in the Beis HaKnesses. You may say that, as Joe pointed out very well, there's a special Persume Nisa in the Ner Shebe Beis HaKnesses. I don't deny that. But we're talking about the light of the Chanukah in our homes. And we're saying that you desist from Melacha up until Chatzos just because of the Beis HaKnesses. I mean, what's the connection here between the light in the Beis HaKnesses and the light that you kindle in your house? That's what perplexed my mind. So once again, just to summarize, we have three different perspectives on this minhag. what I call the two extremes, the minimalist and the maximalist. The minimalist would be a chatzi shah, and it's a din in the ner mishum heker and iser's tamshus. The maximum would be kol hayom, iser melacha, perhaps because yontiv is also a melacha, and they gave Chanukah the days of Chanukah status of yontiv. And somewhere in the middle, we have this ad chatzos halayla, borrowing from the fact that that's when the ner in the Beis HaKnesses is lit. And it's that third approach, the middle compromise approach between the two extremes, that I'd like to focus our attention. So let's put this in the back and let's pick up a strange Ramban in his commentary on the Torah. And back in my days in Canada, I spoke about this Ramban at least twice, maybe even more than that. The Ramban quotes, and shall I say embellishes, Rashi at the beginning of Parshas Baal Loscha. Rashi at the beginning of Parshas Baal Loscha asks the famous question of Chazal, what's the connection, what's the smichus haparshios between Noso, and that's the Chanukah's Hanesiim, and immediately following Noso, at the beginning of Parshas Baal Loscha, the mitzvah of Ner Shebemigdash. And as a matter of fact, in 2 days' time, on Friday, we're going to actually bridge the two, and we'll read from the Torah both Parshas Hanesiim and Baal Loscha, if you remember, the Zos Chanukah. All right. So Rashi says that Aaron HaKohen was suffering what he calls chalishus hadas. He had a weakness and perhaps a kind of a despair because Aaron did not participate, nor his Shevet Kuhuna, in the Chanukah's Hanesiim. No participation in the Chanukah's Hanesiim. Says Rashi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to be Menachem, to console Aaron. And how so? He says to Aaron, Gedolah Mimcha, you have a greater mitzvah than that of the Nesiim. You have the mitzvah of Baal Loschas Haneros, El Mul Pnei HaMenorah Ya'ir. After quoting Rashi, the Ramban asks the following question. Why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu being Menachem Aaron HaKohen with the mitzvah of Ner in the menorah and the Migdash? Why not with the Avodas HaKohanim? The Avodah in the Migdash, Haktoras Haktoras, the Avodah of Yom HaKippurim, She'ena Kshera Ela Bo. And he goes on to list all the unique mitzvahs of Kohanim, and he wonders, why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu place his finger and single out the mitzvah of Ner She Baal Loschas Haner Shebehechol of all the unique mitzvahs of the Kohen? Azoi frek the Ramban. And to answer this question, and shall we say, embellish Rashi in answering the smichos haparshios and the nechama that Aaron was given the mitzvah Baal Loschas Haneros, the Ramban quotes a medrash called Yilamdenu, and the medrash says that Chayecha kol avodos enim ksheros elos man kol zman sha migdash kayam. Batal migdash, batal mitzvos. There's no avodah of carbon without the Beis HaMikdash. Aval haneros li olam el pnei hamenorah ya'ir. So Ramban asks the question: if the unique single out by HaKadosh Baruch Hu of the Ner Shel Mikdash is because it's not batel im achurban. Frek the Ramban, I don't understand. To the same extent that the avoda in the Mikdash is betela with churban, so too the Ner Shel Mikdash is batel with churban. If there's no Mikdash, there's no Heichal, there's no menorah, there's no Baloskas Haneros. And the Ramban answers this question, and I quote, Ella lo ramzu ella lechanukas chashmonoi. The remes here is the Chanukah candles. Sheino heges afli achar churban bigolusein. That the remes here is to the Ner Chanukah, which is not betela with churban. But li olam el pnei hamenorah ya'iru. Does anyone get this Ramban? Does it make any sense? You're talking about a Ner Chanukah, which is zecher for the nest that took place when the Yevanim were defeated by Klal Yisrael. Now you're telling me that Baloschas Haneros is a mitzvah shenoheges li'olam afilu li'achar churban? Yeah. There's a mitzvah of Ner Shebemikdash, and there's another mitzvah of zecher l'nes of Ner Chanukah, but they're two separate mitzvahs. One is Doraisa, one is Rabbanan. One is dependent upon the menorah in the Mikdash, and the other is not. How could the Ramban claim, based on this medrash, that the nechama that was given to Aaron HaKohen was the unique mitzvah of Baloschas Haneros Li'olam El Mul Pnei Hamnorah Ya'iru simply because there'll be another mitzvah called Ner Chanukah? But the answer, I believe, is very pashut, but very profound. It's a Gemara in Sukkah Daf Nun Beis. And the Gemara says that we have a mitzvah of Zeichel Mikdash. We have to find ways and establish takanos because of Zeichel Mikdash. Yeshayahu Hanavi says, Sion Doresh Ein Lo. He cries, woes, laments the situation that no one is Dorish Tzion. Tzion here is a reference to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara says, Mechlal, we derive from Yeshaya de Boy Zechira. We have to be Dorish the Beis HaMikdash. After the Churban, we have to find different ways in which we can re-experience the Beis HaMikdash and remember it. Hence, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established that after the Churban, we take the lulav 7 days, as they did in the Beis HaMikdash, and we count the Omer today as if the Omer was being brought in the Beis HaMikdash, and that's called Zeichel HaMikdash. Hillel had his takana of Korech, of taking the maror and the matzah and eating it together, Zeichel HaMikdash, etc., etc. And Tosfos points out in Masechta Megillah, a very small Tos on the bottom of Chaf Amid Beis, that when we count the Omer, we should add Yehi Ratzon and pray and petition Hashem to bring back the Beis HaMikdash, rebuild it, so that we can fulfill the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. And I believe that the Ramban is adding another mitzvah to the list of mitzvahs that is Zeichel HaMikdash. And Zeichel HaMikdash means, imagine that you are the Kohen fulfilling that mitzvah in the Mikdash. We have no Zeichel HaMikdash for the Avodas HaKohen. We don't go around sprinkling dam on a Mizbeach or shechting an animal l'shem kodshim, it would be kodshei chutz. The Zeichel HaMikdash, in terms of the Avodas HaKohanim, is the mitzvah of halos chasaneros, which now we make a zecher to that ner shebemigdash by lighting the Chanukah candles. So the Chanukah candles are really an extension of the mitzvah of halos chasaneros. The mitzvah didn't die with Churban. We continue that mitzvah in the form of ner Chanukah. And I would add the Baal HaMaor in this context. The Baal HaMaor in his first comment in Perek Bameh Madlikin says that why is the ner Chanukah asur b'hana? And not only asur b'hana, like other mitzvahs, mishum bizui mitzvah, but even if you use the ner Chanukah for another mitzvah, you want to light up your Shabbos table and illuminate your Suda Shabbos, that also is asur, because he says asur kishel heichal shebemigdash. They generated the status of heichal, of ner shebeheichal, which is hegdesh, and cloned it onto the ner Chanukah, because the ner Chanukah is a continuation of the ner shebemigdash, and therefore it's asur b'hana kol ikar, even ha'hana l'shem mitzvah. And if that be the case, Rabbosai, any mitzvah of zechira requires kavana. We can have machlokas where the mitzvah tzrichas kavana, ain't tzrichas kavana. But as far as zechira is concerned, we need kavana. We'll speak about a mitzvah Shem next week when we talk about kiddush, which is a mitzvah of remembering the Shabbos. Zachar Yom Shabbos l'kadsho. We're going to have kavana. So what kavanah should I have? Here, in our part of the world, in about an hour, we're going to light Chanukah candles. We should have kavanah not just for Zeicher L'Nes, but also Zeicher L'Migdash, adding a whole new dimension to the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. In the light of this Ramban, perhaps we can justify the Magen Avram's minhag that connects our ner Chanukah in our bias with the ner she bebeis haknesses. Why do we light the ner Chanukah in the beis haknesses? You might argue, and it's certainly a correct answer, mishum zeicher l'nes. And to publicize the miracle in the Beis HaKnesses, we have a minyan that's gathered together. No doubt that is a kiyum of Persumei Nisa. But I would go a major step further, because the Shulchan Aruch paskins that when you light the Chanukah candles in the Beis HaKnesses, it's got to be B'tzad Doron, on the southern side. And the reason for that is, as the Mishnah Berurah points out, is because of the ner shebeheichal, the balos chasaneros, the menorah was on the south side. There's no doubt in my mind that the mitzvah of hadlaka of ner shebemigdash shebebeis haknesses is zeichel l'migdash. You can argue whether or not when I light in my house there's a connection to the Beis Hamikdash, but you have to grant me that the lighting in the Beis HaKnesses is certainly, without a doubt, Zeichel Hamikdash. So the paradigmic Hadlakas Ner Chanukah Zeichel Hamikdash is in the Beis HaKnesses. That's going to be the paradigm, the model for taking Zeichel Hamikdash, and applying it even to the bias. And if that be the case, perhaps we could shed a light, pardon the pun, on the minhag quoted by the Magen Avram, that we desist from Melacha as long as the ner is lit in the Beis HaKnesses, meaning that the Zeichel Hamikdash through Adlaka is set in stone by the Beis HaKnesses. If the Beis HaKnesses lights until Chatzos, that's going to be my paradigm, my model for a Hadlakas Ner Chanukah Zeichel Hamikdash. The Zeichel Hamikdash is until Chatzos, because what we're doing is we're extending the Ner Chanukah from the Beis HaKnesses over to the bias. And now I can begin to appreciate the minhag of Isur Malach in a totally new light. And that is that in the laws of Beis HaKnesses, the Makom has Kedusha. A Beis HaKnesses has sanctity. And that's called Migdash Ma'at. Our Beis HaKnesses is a microcosm, if you will, of the Beis HaMikdash. And just like in the Beis HaMikdash, you weren't allowed to enter the Mikdash for your own purposes, because the Torah commands us in a mitzvah called Mora Mikdash. So too, you're not allowed to go into a Beis HaKnesses for your own purposes. People don't realize this. So it's now the rainy season, or the snow season. I was told that in Ottawa, the snow looks like a Jewish star. I don't know if that's true or not. It's pretty convincing in the picture, but today we have artificial intelligence, you don't know. But anyway, I don't know if you've ever seen in Toronto a snowflake that looks like a Jewish star. I never saw one, but I was only in Toronto for 2 years. But be that as it may, we don't go into a shul simply to find protection and shelter from the natural elements of cold, rain, or a storm. We don't go into a shul litzarko, el litzarka. In other words, it's got to be litzarch mitzvah. Otherwise, you don't go into a Beis HaKnesses. And if the halacha Beis HaKnesses means it becomes like a Migdash Ma'at with a din of Mora, and now we're extending the Beis HaKnesses to the bayis, and every single bayis b'Yisrael is now lighting Zeichel HaMikdash, so the Zeichel HaMikdash will generate for our adlok in the bayis a status of a Migdash Ma'at. And it's a clone of the Beis HaKnesses lighting. And therefore, we don't go into the bayis. Litzarko el litzarko. There's a din now of makom migdash, which generates an Isur Melacha, because if I'm going to involve myself in Melacha, then I'm going into the bias for my own personal purposes. And this bias has a status of a Migdash Ma'at by virtue of Adlokas Ner Zeichel Migdash. And now I have to enter in Litzorach Mitzvah, not Litzorach. A profound idea to understand the minhag as codified by the Magen Avraham. And I would say the following: if the Rush is correct, that the minhag is to aser melacha for that half hour when the ner is dolik, because we want to make sure you're not benefiting from the ner, then it could be that if my ner Chanukah is here in this corner, and I go lemerchak, and I want to weave or sew on the other end of the room, maybe that's mutter. I don't know. Maybe we're afraid that you'll still get some spillover light from the ner Chanukah. I don't know. But according to Magen Avraham, it's a din in the bias, that the bias becomes a mochel migdash through the zeichel of migdash of ner Chanukah. Then anywhere in the bias is also b'malach. Every cheder, every room is a different bias, and that's halacha in Hilchas Mezuzah. And therefore, if I want to do malacha, then as long as the ner is dolek and there's a mitzvah of zeichel and migdash and a kviyas makom kedusha of migdash, I have to go into another room to do malacha. I can't be on the other side of the room from one corner to the other and say, well, you know what? I'm not benefiting from the ner, because the Isur Melacha is not a reflection of benefiting from the ner, but rather of the makom migdash that was sanctified by ner Chanukah. So it comes out, Bobby, I'll be with you in just one more sentence, that there are three different takes of this minhag. And the common denominator of the Isur Melacha in these three forms of Isur Melacha al pi minhag is the following. It's all for the sake of Kiddush. But the question is, what do we have to be Makadosh? If we go to Rosh, then the Kiddush is on the Ner. Haneros halolu kodeshem. If, on the other hand, we go with the shita of the shilde of the whatchamacallit, of the shibbolei aleket.
Sure.
Then the kiddush is on the yom, on the zman. I'm sanctifying the zman of Chanukah kol hayom with Isa Malach. If we go to shita shlishis, the third shita of the Magen Avram, then the kiddush is on the makom. So we've got a kiddush on the ner, according to one, a kiddush on the yom, according to another, and a kiddush on the bias, according to the third. Yeah, Bob.
So according to the third sheet of Kiddush of the bias, if you put out your Chanukah, like if after half an hour you put out your Chanukah candles, then you'd be okay.
It would be okay. But as long as the ner is doleg, as long as there's a zeichel lemigdash in that ner, and we're going to take our paradigmic case of what? Which ner is going to be the paradigm of the ner of zeichel lemigdash? It's going to be the Beis HaKnesses.
Yeah.
And within that time period that we have a zeichel lemigdash in the Beis HaKnesses, which is migdash mi'at, and generates a din of mora migdash, and therefore you're not letting it go in there for your own personal purposes, to do your own melacha, that becomes the model for the ner shebebayis, which is also a kiyum of zeichel lemigdash, as we saw in the Ramban and in the Baal HaMor, and therefore that ner zeichel lemigdash glows or generates and spreads to encompass the bias, whatever's included under the word bias, that cheder, for the Isa Melacha, because of the din of Migdash Ma'at, the din of Mora Migdash, and an Isa Knisa Litzarko, it's got to be Litzarch Mitzvah.
But that would mean that then I'm wrong what I said. In other words, you're saying that as long as the Beis HaKnesses would have potentially Neros Dolkois, even if you don't have your Chanukah candles lighting, maybe you're not supposed to do Melacha.
No, I wouldn't go that far. In other words, I think what we're doing is we're taking the Ner Shebemigdash, the Ner Shebebeis HaKnesses as the paradigmic model of Ner Shemakomo Hu Migdash, that has a Kiddush Makom, and that's the din of Mora Migdash Ma'at, and we're grafting it on to a Makom of Hadlaka. When is it a Makom Hadlaka? When I have a Ner Chanukah. If I didn't light a Ner Chanukah, or what I have now is no longer a Ner Chanukah because I extinguished it, it once was a Ner Chanukah, then it's no longer a Makom of Zeichel Migdash. You know,
So when he says the Isser Melacha is till Chatzos, it could be till Chatzos. Not saying
correct.
that it's...
That's exactly it. The potential for a Zeichel Migdash is up till Chatzos because it's a spin-off generated by Ner Shebebeis HaKnesses. And the truth be told, I was thinking that if you go with the rush and you need a heker, then maybe you could differentiate between certain categories of Melacha and other categories of Melacha. There may be categories of Melacha which obviously I'm not benefiting from the Ner at all. You know, if it's a very minute, a very precise Melacha, then I need the Ner. But maybe there are other Melachas I could do even in the dark, or even if it's not so lit up. Masha Enkin, if I go with the Magen Avram, it's an absolute all-inclusive Isa Melacha, because then I'm going into that Makom Kadosh, which has the Kedusha of a Beis HaKnesses and a Migdash Ma'at for Zeichel Migdash, and I'm doing it Litzarki for my own purposes. So just to summarize, because I want to add one little thing if we still have a few minutes, there are three different aspects of Kiddush, according to reflected in three different shitos regarding the Isa Melacha, the Minhag of Isa Melacha. One is Kiddush Haner, the other is Kiddush Hazman, meaning the Yom, and the third is Kiddush HaMakom. And I'd like to say the following. Why is it that the women picked up this minhag? It became the banner of the women. And truth be told, one could argue that the women got very excited about Ner Chanukah. It was one mitzvah that they claimed for their own. This is my mitzvah. You know, they have mitzvahs like Ner Shabbos and Nida and Chala. They took on this mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. This is my mitzvah. I want to be mahader this mitzvah as much as I can. Like my wife, Soll sein gesund, she has an extra paragraph of Mos Tzur, because, you know, since the Milchama broke out, various Haitanim, if you could call it that in contemporary sense, have written and composed extra paragraphs for Mos Tzur. So she's very makpid on that. She has other kepedas, you know, she, Soll sein gesund, you know, she wants to watch the Ner as it's Dolek, she recites Tillim, you name it. But why the women? And the answer is, as Tosfos points out in Arvei Pesachim, because the women played a major role in bringing about this miracle. But I'd like to go a step further and suggest this concept of Zeichel Migdash was adopted in the case of Ner Chanukah by the women folk, by the ladies. Why? Let's take a look at Jewish history. And we begin with the period of Golus Mitzrayim, and we find that Miriam comes to her father Amram and says, your Gezerah is worse than Paro. So Miriam is the paradigm of faith in a brighter future, even in the dark, dark Golus of Mitzrayim. And then we have the episode of, where is Moshe Rabbeinu? He went up to Har Sinai, told us he's coming back in 40 days. Where is the man? And the men said, he has left us. He has betrayed us. He's no longer with us. And they build an Egel Azov. The women want no part of it. The men had to force the women to give up their gold ornaments for the sake of the Egel Azov. The women said, no, Moshe didn't betray us. They had unshakable faith. And they understood that Moshe would not have rejected the people of Israel. And because of this, by the way, today's Rosh Chodesh, they got the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, the women. Same thing happened with the Meraglim. The women had unshakable dedication to the land of Israel. And when Kalev says, Olo Nale, it's the women that accepted his banner cry, his battle cry. We will conquer the land of Israel. And they rallied behind the cry of Kalev. And of course, it's the women folk of Benos Tzlafchad that want to inherit a part of the land. Tnu lanu achuza. The women, therefore, manifest unshakable faith in the future. And that's what the Ner Chanukah is all about. We're continuing that mitzvah of Heichal, of Balosras Haneros, because we believe in a bright future, the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. And perhaps we can add one more point. When Yitzchak brings Rivka, Ohela Sora Imo, Rashi, the name of Chazal, says that there were 3 dimensions of Sora Imenu that were lost after her death, and they were replaced once again when Rivka came into the Ohel. And those are the Ner Doluk Me'erev Shabbos L'erev Shabbos, which I believe that represents the bias. The bias has to have a Ner Doluk. And then we have the Challah that a woman bakes on a holy day, on a day that's sacred and sanctified, like Shabbos or Yontif. And finally, the anan kosher al gabe ha-ohel, the Shechina on top of the oil, that represents the Migdash. So we have the three outstanding dimensions of a woman reflected in Sarah and in Rivka Imenu, and that's the Yom, the Ner, and the Bayis. These correspond to the three aspects of the special role of the Jewish women. And therefore, all three minhagim really can be integrated into one whole, and we can understand why the women dafka, with their unshakable faith in a bright future, and specifically in the restoration of the holy Beis HaMikdash, they took on this minhag as their banner, mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. To fulfill all the minhagim of Klal Yisrael, to understand the minhagim on a deeper level, and to see the fruition of those beliefs in the unshakable emunah of Klal Yisrael, especially during these very rough days that we're going through. In the Geula Shlema, in the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, in the Nisim, Bayomim HaHem, and especially Bazman Hazeh. Kein Yiratzon. Wishing you all a Freilich and Chanukah, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Rav. Chanukah Sameach. Chodesh Tov. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shukar.